Good morning. On the morning of October 7th, Ariel Zohar, a 12-year-old boy living in kibbutz near Oz, got up and went for a morning jog. He returned an hour later to discover that his mother, Yasmin, his father Yaniv, and his two sisters, Keshet and Techelet, were brutally murdered by Hamas terrorists. As Ariel was sitting Shiva for his entire family, a member of Zaka came to console him. Zaka is the organization that collects the remains of the victims and prepares them for a proper Jewish burial. Little Ariel turned to the Zaka member and said, "I have one request. Can you get me my father's tefillin from my home?" The Zaka member said, "Well, the home has been burned by the terrorists and the IDF has sealed off the entire kibbutz, but I will do my best." He managed to get permission from the IDF to go back into Ariel's home. And after searching through all the drawers in the burnt home, he finally discovered Ariel's father Yaniv's tefillin and brought it back to Ariel. Why did Ariel want his father's tefillin? Because 2 months later, Ariel was going to be celebrating his bar mitzvah. And he wanted to do it with his father's tefillin. Because you see, these tefillin were no ordinary tefillin. They were the tefillin that were given to his father at his bar mitzvah by his grandfather. And his grandfather received it at his bar mitzvah from his parents, who were shortly afterwards murdered during the Holocaust. And as Ariel wore the tefillin of his great-grandfather who was murdered in the Holocaust at his bar mitzvah, his grandfather stood up to speak, and he said to his grandson Ariel, "When I was 14 years old, my entire family was murdered by the Nazis. But I managed to come to Israel, get married, and rebuild my family. And today I have many children and grandchildren living in the land of Israel, just like you. You too will grow up, get married, build a family, and you will merit to have children and grandchildren living in the land of Israel." October 7th was the one day since the Holocaust that more Jews were killed, murdered, brutally raped, and burnt alive than any day since the Holocaust. Yes, October 7th, today, was a Holocaust in our generation. And like Ariel, many lost their entire families on this very day. But just like after the Holocaust, Israel changed the course of his history. When the very victims of the Holocaust came to Israel and created the state of Israel, so never again should Jews be vulnerable and defenseless. And yes, October 7th was the greatest tragedy in our generation, but for the first time in 2,000 years, the Jewish people are able to defend themselves. And once again, as we mark the first anniversary of October 7th, Israel is on the cusp of creating a new historic reality in the Middle East, finally determined to go after the terrorist organizations, Hamas, Hezbollah, and ultimately the head of the snake, Iran. And like after the Holocaust, the victims of the Holocaust were able to tell their children the tragic story of the Holocaust, but also tell them how they stood up and made sure that never again will this happen. Like finally coming back to our homeland after 2,000 years. And future generations, when we tell the story of October 7th, with that story we will tell our children and grandchildren that we were not helpless, hopeless, or just victims, but we stood up with tremendous courage, bravery, heroism, with resilience and brilliance, and fought back to destroy Hamas, Hezbollah, and ultimately Iran, removing the threat not just from the Middle East, but from all of Western civilization, for all those who love freedom. Once again, the Jewish people are the light unto the nations, while many in the West have become comfortable and lazy and lost their desire to fight against evil. Israel is showing the way in a prophetic promise to the world that we will always be on the front line to combat evil and eliminate it from the world. And not only will the Western world rejoice when the job is done, but many in the Arab world are already secretly rejoicing as they see the defeat of Hamas, the crippling of Hezbollah, and the vulnerability, the weakness, and the isolation of Iran. This is the destiny of the Jewish people, always to be in the forefront. And I believe that history will say that just like in World War II, it took the courage of Winston Churchill to lead the world and show the way in defeating Nazism. The world will say that Israel and Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu rose to the challenge of the hour and ultimately did what the world was sitting back and waiting to be done. But it took little Israel, a tiny, small country, to get the job done. And Israel will get the job done. Today we remember the victims of October 7th. Innocent young men and women dancing at a festival. Mothers, fathers, babies, shot, murdered, burnt, killed brutally and mercilessly. We remember the hostages, over 100 of them, 101 hostages who are still sitting in captivity. We grieve with all the families of the victims of all of the October 7th victims and all the soldiers who died so courageously and selflessly defending the land of Israel and the Jewish people. We grieve with the parents of the hostages who their children are still in captivity. We stand with all the wounded soldiers who lost limbs and suffered terrible casualties and injuries and gave everything to defend the Jewish people. And we stand with the entire people of Israel who have gone through the worst year of their lives. Every day, war, tragedy, bloodshed, tears. But we know that in 1 year we have changed the trajectory of the entire Middle East, which means the trajectory of the entire world. As King Solomon says, there's a time for peace and there's a time for war. We tried time and again to make peace with our enemies, and they rejected it every single time. Now it's clear to the world, or at least to those who don't have bias of anti-Semitism, that there is one solution and one solution only, and that is to utterly destroy and eliminate all those terrorists who there is no speaking to them, but only through strength and power. That is the only language that they understand. And then the free world will be able to rejoice. Yes, today is October 7th. We mourn, we grieve, we cry for those pure, beautiful souls who were so brutally murdered. But we take pride in the fact that over the last year, we have shown the world that never again means never again. And that little Israel, the tiniest of all nations, is showing the world once again what it means to be a light unto all the nations. Make today meaningful by doing a mitzvah, doing something positive for the Jewish people, for Israel, for the IDF, for the victims, for the families, and by extension for all of humanity. Join us at 8 o'clock if you can for prayers, and at 9 o'clock for a breakfast at Palm Beach Synagogue as we will commemorate this tragic day of October 7th.